Eliza never thought the sound of a pen scratching paper would come to haunt her. It had happened 2 months ago in her own kitchen, with the kettle whistling gently and her son David smiling too wide for a Tuesday afternoon. "Just a form for your insurance, Mom," he had said casually, sliding the papers toward her like it was nothing. She didn't read it. Why would she? It was David. Her David. The boy she raised alone after her husband walked out when David was 10, leaving nothing behind but debts and a note that said, "You'll figure it out." And she did. She worked nights cleaning offices, skipped meals to pay for his braces, took on an extra job when he got into college. When he got married, she gifted them part of her savings as a down payment for their first house. And now, at 62, she still lived alone in the house she had paid off penny by penny, with cracked windows she taped over herself and a garden overrun with weeds since her knees began failing. That Tuesday, she had just finished sorting laundry when David showed up. No call, no warning, just his confident knock and that smile, so similar to his father's it made something tighten in her chest. "You know how these companies are?" he said, pouring himself coffee from the pot she had just brewed. "They make everything complicated now. Just a signature, nothing serious." She remembered hesitating for a moment, the pen hovering. "Don't you want me to read it?" she'd asked. "It's just the standard legalese." He waved off. "I'll explain it if you like." But she didn't ask. She signed, and now, standing in the lobby of the county clerk's office, with a copy of the title transfer in her shaking hands, she realized exactly what she'd done. Her name was no longer on the deed. The house now belonged to her son. No co-signature, no clause for protection, just a clean, silent handover, signed without a word. She stared at the bold black letters of his name, feeling the floor shift slightly beneath her. "Are you all right, ma'am?" the clerk asked, but Eliza only nodded, blinking rapidly. She exited into the cold wind, the paper still clenched in her hand, her coat thin against the sudden chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She didn't go home. Instead, she walked. Past the old grocery store where she used to buy David his favorite chocolate milk. Past the park where he'd once begged for 5 more minutes on the swings. Past the church where she had lit candles for his health when he had pneumonia at 6. Her legs ached, her breath came in short gasps, but she walked. Because if she stopped, if she sat down on one of those cold benches, she might never get back up. At some point, the sun dipped low, casting long blue shadows, and Eliza realized her phone had buzzed twice in her pocket. Messages. One from David. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Hope you're doing okay." And one from his wife, Susan. "Can you confirm if the utility bill is still in your name? David's transferring it this week." Transferring it, like she was just a placeholder. A stepping stone. Eliza stood in front of the bakery that used to give her day-old loaves when money was tight and stared at the sky as it darkened. She had always believed in family, believed in sacrifice, believed that if you gave your all, they'd at least remember who you were. But David had taken her name off the place she called home and hadn't even told her. No explanation, no apology, just a smile and a pen. And now, Eliza knew 2 things. First, her son was not the boy she raised. And second, he thought she wouldn't do anything about it. He was wrong. Eliza didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table in her worn robe, staring at the steam curling from a chipped mug of tea she hadn't touched. The silence in the house felt different now, heavier, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every creak of the floor, every rustle of the wind outside seemed to echo with betrayal. She kept replaying the moment she signed those papers. David's voice, his expression. Too calm, too rehearsed. She hadn't seen it then, but now it was all she could see. Around 4 in the morning, she opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out the accordion file she kept her important papers in. Taxes, birth certificate, old letters from her mother. She thumbed through the contents until she found the original deed. Her name, Clear as day. Eliza Ruth Marston. Dated, notarized, hers. And now it wasn't. She folded it gently and placed it beside the new copy from the clerk's office, like two versions of herself looking at each other across a courtroom. At sunrise, she got dressed, real clothes, not her robe, and walked the half-mile to the bus stop. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She didn't even tell herself. Her feet led her to the only place she could think of. The office of Margaret Henley, her old friend's daughter, now a real estate attorney downtown. Margaret hadn't seen her in years, but she welcomed Eliza with a startled warmth, ushering her into the back room with a cup of coffee and quiet eyes. "It's good to see you," Margaret said. "I wish it were under better circumstances." Eliza slid the two documents across the desk without a word. Margaret read them slowly, her expression tightening. "You signed this voluntarily?" Eliza nodded once. "I thought it was insurance." Margaret exhaled, leaning back. "Legally, it's binding, but morally?" She looked Eliza in the eye. "That's theft." The word hung between them like a bad smell. Theft. From her own son. "I don't want to sue him," Eliza whispered. I need to understand why, and I want options, quiet ones." Margaret nodded, opening a folder. "Then we do this carefully." Over the next hour, Margaret laid out possibilities. Contest the transfer on grounds of deception, petition for a trust revision if coercion could be proven, or, if Eliza preferred, set up a will that bypassed David entirely. "It won't change the past," Margaret warned, "but it can change what happens next." Eliza left the office with a folder of legal strategies and a heavy heart. As she waited for the bus, she noticed a young mother helping her toddler onto the steps. The child laughed, clinging to her, trusting her completely. Eliza looked away. At home, she found David's car in her driveway. Her heart jumped. He was sitting on her porch swing, sipping coffee from one of her mugs, as if nothing had changed. "Hey, Mom," he said casually, standing up to kiss her cheek. She turned slightly so he brushed only air. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check on you." She didn't answer, just unlocked the door and stepped inside. He followed. "So?" he said, setting the mug down. "Susan and I were thinking, maybe next month, you could stay with Aunt Marie for a bit while we do some renovations. You know, fix the kitchen, maybe update the floors. It'll raise the value." Eliza stood in the hallway, staring at him. "You mean your kitchen? Your floors?" David froze. "Mom, come on. It's still your home." "No, David," she said, her voice quiet but edged in steel. "It used to be my home, until you took it from me." He looked away, jaw tightening. "You signed it." "Yes, because I trusted you." The silence between them buzzed with unsaid things. "You didn't even ask me?" she continued. "Didn't even think I might want to read it. You just smiled and lied." "I didn't lie," he muttered. "I just didn't explain everything." Eliza nodded slowly, then walked past him to the living room. The Christmas cards were still taped to the mantel, unopened. She picked one at random, tore it open, and tossed the glittering card onto the table. "You and Susan enjoy the renovations?" she said without turning around. "I won't be here." David stared at her, confused. "What does that mean?" She turned then, and for the first time in years, he saw something new in her eyes. Not hurt, not fear, control. "It means you'll find out soon enough." Eliza woke up early the next morning with a strange calm settling over her. She made coffee without thinking, as if her hands still believed it was just another Tuesday. But everything had changed. She walked through the house slowly, taking in each room with fresh eyes. This wasn't just her home anymore. It was a place that had been taken from her, quietly, efficiently, like someone slipping a ring off her finger while she slept. She opened the closet and pulled out her suitcase. Not because she had decided to leave for good, but because she needed space, distance, clarity. Folding her clothes neatly, She chose only what mattered: warm sweaters, comfortable shoes, the framed photo of David as a boy that she kept on her nightstand. She stared at it for a moment. He looked so happy then, so innocent. Where did that boy go? Had she lost him completely, or had she just never truly known him? She didn't cry. The tears had dried up sometime between the county clerk's office and Margaret's law firm. Now, there was only focus. She called Margaret. "Can we move forward?" she asked simply. Margaret's voice was steady. "Yes, I've drawn up the necessary papers. We'll initiate a revocation of transfer based on lack of informed consent and undue influence. It won't be fast, but we have a strong case. And Eliza?" "Yes?" "Do not leave the house. Not yet." Eliza hung up and sat back down, the weight of the suitcase at her feet. Around noon, a knock came. She expected David, but it was Susan, immaculate as always, perfect hair, high boots, an air of impatient entitlement. "We need to talk," Susan said without waiting for an invitation. She stepped inside, eyes sweeping over the living room like she was assessing furniture at an estate sale. Eliza followed her silently. "David is upset," Susan began, folding her arms. "He said you accused him of stealing. That's a serious accusation." Eliza tilted her head. "Is it untrue?" "You signed the papers," Susan snapped. "You can't act like you're the victim now. We're trying to help you, you know. Fixing this place up, making it livable." Eliza looked around, at the same wallpaper she'd put up with her own hands 25 years ago, at the chair with the stitched cushion she repaired every winter, at the house that raised her son. "Livable for whom?" she asked quietly. Susan hesitated. "David thought you'd appreciate the upgrades." "Upgrades like removing me from the deed without a conversation?" Eliza said, her voice sharp enough to slice through the pretense. "I've spoken to an attorney. We're reversing the transfer. You both took something from me under false pretenses. That won't stand." Susan's expression darkened. "You're really going to do this? After everything we've done for you?" Eliza smiled thinly. "What exactly have you done, Susan?" "We included you in everything. Holidays, birthdays, the kids." "You forgot my birthday this year," Eliza said calmly. "David hasn't called just to talk in months. The last time I saw my grandkids, they asked if I was moving out because Daddy bought the house." Susan's jaw tensed. "You're making a mistake." Eliza stepped closer, her eyes steady. "Number, I made a mistake when I trusted you both not to treat me like an inconvenience. That won't happen again." Susan turned on her heel and left without another word. Eliza locked the door behind her, the click echoing like a final note. Later that evening, David texted. No apology, just, "We'll talk tomorrow. Don't do anything stupid." Eliza didn't respond. Instead, she took out Margaret's folder and reviewed the steps. It would be messy, emotional, public even, but she would no longer be silent. She was not a guest in her own home. And tomorrow, when David came back expecting to reason with her, he would find the locks changed and a notice on the door that bore his own name, this time with consequences. David arrived the next morning with his usual confident stride, expecting resistance, but not reality. He reached for the doorknob and froze. The lock had been changed. A crisp envelope was taped to the door, his name handwritten in steady, deliberate ink. He pulled it off and opened it right there on the porch. Inside was a legal notice from Margaret Henley's office. A formal statement contesting the title transfer on the grounds of misrepresentation, and an injunction barring him from any structural changes to the property until resolution. His face drained of color. He knocked, more aggressively now. "Mom, open the door!" Eliza stood inside, heart pounding but face calm. She didn't move. She simply watched through the side window as the boy she once knew shouted her name like a stranger. She didn't answer. Eventually he left, jaw clenched, car tires squealing as he pulled away. That night, she lit a single candle in the living room. Not for ambiance, but for memory. She placed the same photograph of David on the mantel, right next to the one of her parents. It didn't feel like surrender. It felt like ceremony. Over the next week, Margaret moved quickly. Witness testimonies were gathered, including 2 neighbors who remembered David pressuring Eliza on the porch that afternoon with the papers. Margaret drafted a compelling case file. Eliza stayed out of sight. She didn't answer David's texts, though they grew increasingly desperate. "Mom, this is getting out of hand. You're making a scene. People are asking questions. And finally, what do you want from me?" Eliza stared at that last message for a long time. She wanted to respond. She almost typed, "I want my son back." But instead, she wrote nothing, because the truth was clearer than ever. She didn't want anything from him anymore. One night, Susan came back, alone this time, without the sharp heels and confident posture. Her eyes were tired. She didn't knock, just stood outside until Eliza opened the door slowly. "May I come in?" Eliza didn't answer, but stepped aside. Susan walked in, sat down, and looked around as if she was seeing the house for the first time. "You know," she said softly, "I used to envy this place." It felt like it had love in the walls. Eliza said nothing. Susan went on. "David, he's been under pressure. Work's been slow. We didn't mean for it to go this far." "But it did," Eliza replied, her tone flat. "He had a choice. He made it." "I know." Susan looked down. "I didn't stop him. That's on me too." Eliza took a long breath, studying the woman across from her. The polished exterior now chipped, revealing something almost human. "And what do you want now, Susan?" There was a pause. "To make it right, whatever that means." Eliza looked toward the fireplace. "Then let it mean leaving me alone until the court decides. I deserve peace, and a home I don't have to beg for." Susan nodded, tears forming but unspoken. She stood up. "I hope one day you'll forgive him." Eliza didn't respond, not because she didn't know, but because some answers are too sacred to say aloud. After Susan left, Eliza closed the door gently. No slamming, no rage, just quiet. But it was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm and before a reckoning. Because in 3 days, they'd be in court. And David, for the first time in his life, would have to explain to a judge why he thought his mother didn't need her own house. The courtroom was colder than Eliza expected. Not in temperature, but in spirit. Sterile walls, harsh lighting, the low hum of whispers and shifting papers. She sat quietly at the petitioner's table beside Margaret, hands folded in her lap, her best navy blouse buttoned to the top. Across from her sat David in a charcoal suit he hadn't worn since his wedding, flipping through his phone like this was just another meeting. Susan wasn't with him. Eliza didn't know if that meant something, but it didn't matter. The bailiff called the hearing to order, and just like that, decades of sacrifice, love, and blind trust were reduced to docket numbers and formal statements. Margaret spoke first, calm, measured, firm. She presented the signed deed, then the testimony of manipulation, citing the timing, Eliza's misunderstanding of the paperwork, and David's failure to disclose the truth. "This wasn't a gift," Margaret stated. "It was a betrayal masked as bureaucracy." David's lawyer, a tall, tired man who looked like he didn't want to be there, argued back with technicalities. "She signed voluntarily. No coercion can be proven." David didn't look up once. Eliza sat through it all like stone. But inside her chest, something was breaking open. Not pain, not anger. Clarity. When the judge finally asked if Eliza had anything to say, she stood, slow but steady. "Your Honor," she began, voice low but unwavering. "I didn't come here to punish my son. I came here because I spent my whole life doing what I thought a mother should. I worked night shifts. I skipped meals. I gave up everything to make sure he had what he needed." She paused. "And in return, he took the roof over my head and called it a misunderstanding." The room was silent. Even David finally looked up. "I signed because I trusted him. But I've learned something. Trust without truth is just silence waiting to collapse. She sat down. The judge didn't speak for a moment. He reviewed the documents again, adjusted his glasses, then addressed the room. This is a complicated case. Legally, the transfer was signed. But morally, I see grounds for reconsideration based on misrepresentation. I will be issuing a temporary stay on property rights until a full review is conducted. No modifications, no sales, no removals. David's jaw clenched. Margaret gave Eliza a small nod. Outside, the air felt warmer despite the overcast sky. Margaret walked her to the curb. This was just the beginning, she said. But it was a good beginning. Eliza nodded. I know. She didn't go straight home. Instead, she walked to the bakery where she used to take David every Saturday morning. The young girl behind the counter smiled. Fresh out of the oven, she said, handing over a cinnamon bun. Eliza took it, warm in her hands, and sat by the window. For the first time in weeks, she let herself feel everything. The grief, the betrayal, the quiet strength it took to sit in that courtroom and speak. And when her phone buzzed, she looked without flinching. It was David. Just one line. You really want to go through with this? Eliza didn't reply. She simply turned off the phone, took a slow bite of the bun, and stared out the window. She was done explaining herself. Let him wonder. Let him sit in the silence she once filled. Because the next step wasn't about him. It was about taking back what was hers. And she wasn't finished. Not yet. 2 weeks passed. David didn't come by. No texts, no calls. Eliza thought she'd feel relief, but what settled in instead was something deeper, something hollow, like the echo of a house where laughter used to live. She filled the days cleaning, sorting drawers, touching old photo albums that now felt like artifacts from a different life. The house remained hers, legally frozen but spiritually bruised. Each room carried memories, and each memory now had a shadow. Margaret called regularly. We're making progress, she said. His lawyer is pushing for a quiet settlement. I think he wants this to disappear. Eliza listened, said thank you, hung up, and sat in the same chair by the window each evening as dusk colored the sky. It was during one of those dusks that the doorbell rang. Eliza opened it to find a small boy standing on her porch, no more than 6, dark hair and wide eyes. Are you Grandma Eliza? He asked. Her breath caught. Yes. Daddy said I couldn't see you, the boy whispered, but Mommy said I could if I didn't tell him. Behind him stood Susan, her hands clasped tightly, expression unreadable. I'm sorry, she said. I just thought he should know where he comes from. Eliza stepped aside without a word, and the boy ran inside, straight to the piano. He didn't play, just ran his fingers across the keys like he remembered them. Susan lingered in the doorway. He's different when he talks about you, like you're a superhero. Eliza's eyes stayed on the boy. I'm not. You are to him. For the next hour, the house filled with a quiet kind of joy. Eliza made tea. The boy, Lucas, asked for honey twice. He told her about school, about the cat they were fostering, about how Daddy got angry when someone touched his desk. Eliza smiled through every story. When it was time to go, Lucas wrapped his arms around her waist. Can I come back? You always can, she whispered. Susan nodded. I'll handle it. After they left, Eliza sat on the steps. For the first time since this began, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a thread. Frayed, yes, but still part of the fabric that held things together. The next day, Margaret called again. His lawyer just submitted a proposal. They're offering to reverse the deed, quietly. No court battle, but there's a condition. Eliza closed her eyes. What is it? He wants you to sign a document stating you won't pursue damages or press charges. Eliza laughed softly. He wants forgiveness without apology? Margaret hesitated. What do you want to do? Eliza thought about it all. The lies, the signatures, the silence, the cinnamon bun, the little boy at her piano. I want my house back, she said, but I'm not giving him peace until he earns it. Then we hold. That night, David called, for the first time since court. Eliza let it go to voicemail. Then she listened. Mom, I screwed up. I thought it would be easier if everything was in my name. I thought you wouldn't care. I don't know. Maybe I was just scared. Scared you'd need more help. Scared I wouldn't be enough. I'm sorry. He paused. I miss you. She played the message twice, then once more. But she didn't call back. Not yet. Instead, she walked to the mirror in the hallway, the one David broke when he was 12 with a baseball. The crack still ran down the corner. She touched the edge of it and looked at herself. The lines on her face weren't sadness. They were proof of everything she'd lived through, everything she had yet to become. The following morning, Eliza stood at the kitchen counter pouring coffee when she heard the faint knock at the front door. It wasn't sharp or urgent, it was hesitant, like whoever stood there wasn't sure they should be. She set the mug down and walked slowly, each step deliberate, bracing herself for what she already suspected. When she opened the door, David stood there. No suit, no bravado, just a faded hoodie, jeans, and eyes that had lost their certainty. Hi, he said, his voice thin. Eliza said nothing. The silence between them wasn't cruel. It was honest. He looked over her shoulder like maybe Susan or Lucas might be inside, like maybe this wasn't just between them. Can I come in? He asked. She thought about it, not long, then stepped aside. He entered like a guest, scanning the room that used to be his childhood universe. He looked at the piano, the mantel, the kitchen table with 2 empty chairs, and for a second, Eliza saw a flicker in his expression. Recognition, maybe even regret. He didn't sit. I listened to your message, she said, folding her arms. And I've heard better apologies from strangers who bump into me at the grocery store. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. She walked past him to the living room. You didn't just make a mistake, David. You planned this. You waited until I was tired, until I trusted you. You knew exactly what those papers were. He opened his mouth, but she held up a hand. I don't want excuses. I want to understand. Why did you do it? David's eyes met hers. Because I was scared. She laughed once, bitter. You? Of what? Of losing control. Of being the one who couldn't fix things. Susan lost her job. The mortgage on our house is a mess. I thought if I had your place in my name, I could leverage it, maybe refinance. So you gambled with my home? She snapped. You stole from me. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to get caught, she corrected. He sat then, heavily, shoulders sagging. I didn't know how to ask for help. I thought if I fixed it first, I could pretend it never happened. I didn't think you'd fight back. Eliza's eyes narrowed. Because I never have before. He nodded. Yeah. The word hung between them like a final nail. She sat across from him, her voice softer now, but no less firm. You don't get to say you're sorry and expect everything to go back. You crossed a line. You humiliated me. You treated me like a burden you could outmaneuver. He swallowed hard. What do you want me to do? She studied his face. The same eyes she rocked to sleep, the same hands she taught to tie shoelaces. She could forgive him, but not now. Maybe not ever. I want you to remember what it feels like to be shut out, to be told nothing, to realize the person you trusted most thought you didn't matter. He nodded, eyes wet. Okay. I'm not saying we'll never talk again, she added, standing. But right now, you're not welcome here. She opened the door. He stood, shaky. Can I at least see Lucas? That's up to Susan. And him. You'll have to earn your place, just like I did when you were little. He nodded again and stepped outside. She closed the door behind him and leaned her forehead against the wood. Her hands were trembling, but not from fear. From power. Quiet, hard-earned power. The kind you only gain after being broken by someone you raised. She walked back to the kitchen, sat down, and picked up her coffee. It had gone cold, but she sipped it anyway. It tasted bitter, but it was hers. Weeks passed. Spring crept in quietly, softening the edges of winter with sunlit mornings and the distant chirping of birds returning home. Eliza filled her days with motion, repainting the baseboards, planting new herbs in the garden, donating the clothes she no longer needed. The house began to feel different, not just physically, but spiritually, as if it, too, was shedding old wounds. The silence no longer hurt. It healed. Margaret called again. "Good news," she said. "The title has been reversed. It's official. You own the house, uncontested. David signed the release." Eliza let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Did he say anything?" "Only that he understood." That night, Eliza lit a candle and placed it on the mantel next to the photo of Lucas he'd drawn for her, a crayon sketch of them holding hands in front of the house. On the back, in messy letters, he'd written, "Grandma's home." 2 days later, Susan stopped by, alone as usual. She brought Lucas, who ran in without knocking and hugged Eliza's waist so tightly she lost her breath. "Guess what?" he said. "I have a school play. I want you in the front row." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Eliza whispered. Susan lingered in the doorway again, but this time she looked lighter. "He talks about you all the time," she said. "He draws pictures, tells stories. He says you're brave." Eliza smiled. "I wasn't brave. I was tired of being quiet." "Sometimes," Susan said softly, "that's the bravest thing of all." As the sun began to set, Eliza walked them out to the gate. Lucas waved until the car disappeared, and for the first time in months, Eliza didn't feel like a woman abandoned. She felt like a woman who chose herself. That evening, she opened the drawer beside her bed and pulled out the original deed, the one with her name in crisp black ink. She placed it in a new folder, labeled it simply, "Mine." The phone buzzed once more. A message from David. "I hope someday you'll let me back in. Until then, I'll be waiting." She stared at it for a while, then typed her reply. "I'm not the same woman who signed that paper, David, and you're not the same boy I raised. But maybe one day, we'll meet again, as equals. Until then, take care of your son. He needs you more than he needs to watch you run from the truth." She pressed send. Then she stood, pulled open the window, and breathed in the warm evening air. For the first time in a long time, the house felt light, and so did she. 3 months later, Eliza stood in the school auditorium, holding a bouquet of tulips and trying not to cry as Lucas took the stage dressed as a tree, wide grin, arms raised high, proud and beaming. She sat in the front row just like he'd asked, right in the center, where he could see her. And he did. Every time he looked out at the crowd, he found her eyes and waved with such joy that the tight knot that had lived in Eliza's chest for so long finally began to loosen. After the play, Susan approached, holding Lucas's backpack and a juice box. "He asked if you'd come over for dinner," she said, smiling. "He told me you probably make better mashed potatoes than I do." Eliza laughed. "Only because mine are made with too much butter, and no apologies." They drove together in Susan's car, Lucas in the back seat kicking his legs to an invisible beat. Eliza looked out the window as they passed familiar streets, roads she had walked in pain, in anger, in silence. And now, she was riding down them not as a woman who'd been stolen from, but as a woman who'd claimed herself again. At dinner, Lucas told stories, mouthful of rice, and Susan poured wine. The table was warm, filled with the kind of ordinary comfort Eliza hadn't allowed herself to want for months. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something softer. Coexistence. Rebuilding. After the dishes were done and Lucas had gone to bed, Susan turned to her quietly. "He's been going to therapy," she said. "David." Eliza didn't respond, just kept wiping the counter with slow, circular motions. He says he's trying to understand what he did, what it meant. Eliza finally looked up. Trying is not the same as changing. I know, Susan said. But he's not the man he was that day on your porch. I see that. He's slower, quieter, less sure of himself, which I think is a good thing. He's afraid, Eliza said. And he should be. Not of punishment, but of what he almost lost. Susan nodded. He wrote you something. She pulled a folded letter from her purse and slid it across the table. Eliza stared at it for a long time before picking it up. At home that night, she sat by the fireplace with the letter unopened in her lap. The house was silent, but not empty. It held her now, fully. She watched the flames dance, heard the wind tapping gently against the windows, and felt no rush to read David's words. He had taken so much without asking. Now, she would decide what to give and when. Hours passed. Eventually, she unfolded the letter. The handwriting was familiar, firm, controlled, but this time shaky at the edges. He spoke of shame, of his smallness, of the moment he realized his own son looked at Eliza with a reverence he couldn't understand. I didn't just steal your house, he wrote. I tried to steal your worth, and I can never undo that. But if you ever let me back in, just as a visitor, I'll be grateful for the rest of my life. Eliza folded the letter gently and placed it in the drawer beside the deed. Not as closure, as a bookmark. Later that week, she started volunteering at the local library, reading to children on Wednesdays and Saturdays. On her first day, as she sat in a semicircle of eager faces, one small girl with curly hair raised her hand and asked, "Are you someone's grandma?" Eliza smiled, her eyes soft. "Yes," she said. "And I'm also my own person." And that, finally, was enough.